Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. This hour, we are hearing from Vladimir Putin's spokesman right before Putin goes face-to-face with President Biden. What does he have to say about the relationship with the United States? That's next. Plus, terrifying and disturbing threats, how election officials and their families in the United States are being targeted by those inspired by Trump's big lie just for doing their jobs. And leading this hour, the Justice Department Inspector General is now investigating an extraordinary action by the Trump Justice Department as an apparent response to news items about ties between Team Trump and Russia. Sources confirming to CNN, the New York Times report, that Trump's Justice Department subpoenaed Apple for data from more than 100 accounts starting back in 2018. Among those affected, House Intelligence Committee Democrats, along with staffers and their family members. The New York Times reports prosecutors were looking for the sources behind those stories Trump hated so much, and we're now just learning about it because Apple was under a gag order that expired this year. Congressman Eric Swalwell, who had his data seized, accused Trump of weaponizing the Justice Department to go after his political opponents. And as CNN's Manu Raju now reports, there are now growing calls for Congress to bring in Jeff Sessions and Bill Barr to answer questions.
Former President Donald Trump's Justice Department under intense scrutiny today after new revelations suggested he employed the department's awesome power to investigate his enemies. The Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, asking the department's Inspector General to begin an investigation after news broke that Trump's Justice Department seized records of House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff and Committee Democrat Eric Swalwell, along with staff and even their family members.
I can't say that it was extraordinarily broad. People having nothing to do with the intelligence matters that are at least being reported on. It just shows what a broad fishing expedition it was, and so many norms were broken in connection with this.
Sources tell CNN the effort began in February 2018 when Attorney General Jeff Sessions ran the department. The subpoenas were related to leaks of classified information regarding contacts between Russians and Trump associates. More than 100 accounts were affected, casting a wide net that even swept up at least one minor. It included a gag order, which was renewed 3 times before expiring this year. And it wasn't until May that Apple notified customers that their records had been seized. On a private conference call today, sources tell CNN that committee Democrats were animated about getting to the bottom of who was behind this effort and are now asking Apple to provide them with more details about whether additional members were targeted. A source tells CNN that Sessions was not involved in the subpoenas, even though it began under his tenure. And the effort continued under Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr, who had this exchange with then-Senator Kamala Harris in 2019.
Could you repeat that question?
I will repeat it.
Yeah.
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The president or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest.
This afternoon, Barr told Politico that he was, quote, not aware of any congressman's records being sought in a leak case. Barr adding, I never discussed the leak cases with Trump.
Okie doke.
In the Senate, the top 2 Democrats want Barr to say that under oath, threatening to subpoena him along with Sessions and other officials to compel their testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, the 2 top Republicans in Congress, Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell, both have not yet weighed in on this, but one other senior Republican has, Chuck Grassley, who is the lead Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He issued a statement saying, in part, investigations into members of Congress and staff are nothing new, especially for classified leaks. And that position is important because they need bipartisan support in the Senate Judiciary Committee to issue a subpoena. On the House side, though, Jake, Democrats can issue subpoenas on their own, and they are frustrated with Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, for not giving them enough information about this case so far. Jake?
All right, Manu Raju, thanks so much. Let's bring in Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois, who's also on the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, thanks for joining us. Have you figured out or confirmed whether or not you were targeted in this Justice Department hunt for leaks?
No, I'm still trying to figure that out, Jake.
So going after metadata from Apple is just one way to spy on people. You were expected to be briefed by Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff earlier today about this. Given what we know, how extensive was this search for whoever was giving media, whoever was giving journalists stories? Could it extend beyond this court request to Apple?
It might. I saw reports that at least one other internet service provider may have been contacted. You have to remember that they were going after not only members, but also their families, and not only just the staff of the Intelligence Committee, but also staff in the personal offices of the members. And so just a number of questions come up, one of them being, was there any complicity by any of the Republicans on the committee with this investigation, these shocking secret subpoenas? And then two, why are we finding about this from Apple as opposed to the Justice Department? I'm still grappling with that question. I don't understand why we weren't given a heads up notice from this Justice Department.
So far, we haven't heard of any Republicans targeted in this search or any Democrats on the Senate Intelligence Committee. It seems to be exclusive to people Trump perceived as political opponents on the House Intelligence Committee and their staffers. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that's my understanding so far.
Is there any indication that any of these that there was any grounds for the suspicions, or were they just fishing? I mean, people do leak. I've never personally heard of any of the people that have been named specifically leaking, but their names get bandied about by Republicans and conservatives in the media as people that they suspect of it. Was there any evidence of it?
No. And quite frankly, the fact that they were fishing in the personal offices of some of these members who have nothing to do, that those personal staffers have nothing to do with the national security issues or to Russia or anything like that, means that they were looking for other information as well, and that's deeply disturbing. Yeah,
and just to explain for people watching, let's say Congressman Schiff, he's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. His staffers on the committee would know things that the staffers in his California congressional district office would have no idea, and they wouldn't be sharing that information. Do you think that Congress needs to call in former Attorney General Bill Barr, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions for questioning? How far do you think you need to go, Congress needs to go to get accountability here?
Well, I think that not only do they need to be called in for questioning under oath, but you have to remember there are multiple DOJ attorneys who were under Barr conducting this investigation who remain there today. Top of mind is this gentleman, Mr. Benvenuto, who was a gangland prosecutor brought in from New Jersey in 2020 to basically revive this investigation into members of Congress. He's still there in the National Security Division. I don't know why, but he's still there, and he has a lot of explaining to do as well.
I've heard and seen some comments by civil libertarians saying, look, you guys sign off on these kind of laws that allow prosecutorial discretion to take and grab the metadata of almost any American and based on their own discretion. Now it's just applying to you, so you're offended by it. But this is the fault of the House Intelligence Committee to begin with, Democrats and Republicans, for allowing prosecutors to have discretion to do this for any American.
I think we have to look at that. I think at this point, the Justice Department has way too much discretion, prosecutorial discretion. The grand jury impaneled to conduct this investigation basically just rubber stamped whatever the Justice Department attorneys said was necessary for this investigation. And the court basically entrusted these Justice Department attorneys to do the right thing. Well, obviously they were wrong in that assumption.
Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy from the great city of Chicago, thanks so much. Hope you have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jim.
Coming up, President Biden about to face Vladimir Putin, what the Kremlin is telling CNN about the meeting. That's coming up. Plus, how internet sleuths. Breaking news in our politics lead, new details on how former Attorney General Bill Barr handled leak investigations at the Justice Department, like the one involving House Democratic lawmakers, which has sparked renewed scrutiny of Barr. Let's bring in Evan Perez at the Justice Department, who is breaking the story. And Evan, tell us what you know.
Well, Jake, they say that victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. And so that's what we're finding in this story today. It's a case that didn't go anywhere, and we can't find anyone who says that they were behind or they authorized for members of Congress to have their records seized from Apple. And so we talked to someone familiar with Bill Barr's thinking, and what we're hearing is that Barr has no memory of approving this. He doesn't remember this particular case. He remembers getting briefed on multiple leak investigations, and he knows that President Trump was frustrated with leak cases that were ongoing. But he says that, according to people who've talked to him, he says that he doesn't remember the president instructing him to seize the records of Adam Schiff and Congressman Swalwell. And that he believes that what was happening in early 2020 when he brought in this new prosecutor from New Jersey was simply that he was frustrated that a lot of these cases were sitting around. He wanted Justice Department officials to either charge cases or dismiss them, and that's what ended up happening in this case, Jake. In this case, the new Attorney General, Merrick Garland, decided that there wasn't enough here to bring charges, and that's now why there's now an investigation as to how this came to pass.
All right, Evan Perez at the Justice Department, thanks so much. Let's discuss with our panel. And Gloria, let me just start. This stinks. This whole thing stinks. We're finding out that there are all these leak investigations based on supposedly, well, we don't know in some cases why there were these court orders to get the records of Barbara Starr at CNN, plus the New York Times, the Washington Post. Now we find out there are these metadata searches for members of Congress.
Gag orders for
and
years.
it stinks.
It does. It does. And so, what Evan is saying is the Attorney General is saying, I really didn't know about this.
Yes,
and
it's an immaculate leak investigation.
Right. And what he said to Politico on the record was, I was getting criticized by cabinet members and members of the intelligence community about the department not having done anything on leak cases. So I wanted to make sure they were being pursued.
Right.
Okay. But what if the leak case involved the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee or another member, at least, of the House Intelligence Committee? Shouldn't the Attorney General have had some information about where they were going on these leak cases? I mean, publicly, the President of the United States accused Adam Schiff of leaking. Right? We know that. He did it many times.
Yeah.
So the question is, how could he not have known when he appointed someone to revive what were dormant investigations? He revives them and, says, go ahead. And then what? No one reports back to him about what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, Republicans say this, right? They just like they say a whole bunch of stuff. All sorts of political operatives say a whole bunch of things. But Schiff is a leaker. That doesn't make it evidence. The fact that people on Fox are saying it as talking points. Now we have the top Democrats in the Senate, Schumer and Durbin, calling for former attorneys general Barr and Sessions to testify. What do you think? Where do you think this is going?
So, Democrats privately acknowledge that the chance of that subpoena succeeding is actually not guaranteed because as
Sessions and Barr to testify.
Right, exactly. Because as Monty pointed out earlier, because the Senate judiciary is split, 50-50 equally in half, there has to be at least one Senate Republican to join in with Democrats on that subpoena. And if you look at the panel, there's no Mitt Romney or Susan Collins on that panel. It's stacked with a lot of Trump loyalists and Trump allies. I would be watching, for example, perhaps Ben Sass or Mike Lee, who is very vocal on civil liberties issue and privacy issues. But otherwise, we think this is something that's going to die in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And obviously, the focus is going to be on the chamber that does have unilateral subpoena power, which is the House. And we haven't heard too much yet, specifically from House leaders, on what their plans are regarding trying to get Barr and Sessions to testify.
And meanwhile, Gloria, the watchdog for the Department of Justice, the Inspector General, he has said he's going to launch an investigation.
He will.
But, I mean...
So what?
Right.
I mean, not to put too fine a point.
That's just a report that drops in 7 months, and there's not necessarily any accountability.
Right. It's going to be an important report, and the accountability will be in the report. But the question is, what can they do about it?
Right.
So where are the guardrails? How do you put the guardrails back? There's some folks like Ron Wyden of Oregon, Senator Wyden, who are talking about strict limits on gag orders that would say, if you're the target of one of these investigations, you ought to know about it sooner than the members of Congress did.
Yeah.
But that's sort of around the edges. I mean, the irony, nobody ever thought you would need these kind of guardrails.
Yeah.
But it's very clear that you do.
And we heard, Sungmin, we heard from a lot of Republicans, rightly so, when there seemed to be FISA abuses, when Carter Page, it seemed like he was spied on inappropriately, when information was left out of the warrants, making good arguments. I'm not taking issue with anything they were saying. It did look like the FBI abused their power. Are any Republicans speaking out about this today?
I mean, not really. I mean, Republican leaders have been pretty quiet on this news so far. Obviously, they will get asked this when they return to Washington next week. But I can tell you their answers on whether, for example, these subpoenas should be issued, that's probably going to track along what Senator Chuck Grassley, who's the top Republican on the Judiciary Committee, said, a couple of hours ago. He's pointing to that Inspector General investigation as sufficient. And he's pointed out, there are investigations into members of Congress, and that's not a new thing. So I can tell you when Mitch McConnell gets asked about this, that's the line that we're going to hear from him. All
right, Sungmin Kim and Gloria Borger, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it. Putin's spokesman talking to CNN and saying that Russia's relationship. And our world lead, the start of the G7 summit was all smiles today as leaders from the world's most advanced economies discussed climate change, the global economy. They met with Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Tomorrow, it will be more serious. Focus turns to Russia. President Biden hoping to get the allies on the same page ahead of his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In an exclusive interview with CNN, Putin's press secretary said the main reason Putin is even meeting with Biden is because the two countries have a, quote, poor relationship. There's some breaking news for you. CNN's Matthew Chance joins us now live from Moscow. Matthew, what else did the Kremlin spokesman say?
Well, Jake, first of all, we spoke about the possibility of a joint press conference. And, I think what came out of the conversation I had with Dmitry Peskov, the press spokesperson for Vladimir Putin, is that there wasn't going to be a joint press conference. And that was disappointing to them. They said they'd gone into this process expecting and asking for a joint press conference, but it seems that the American side did not want to do that, obviously for various reasons. And that's interesting because, one of the main reasons that Vladimir Putin, was so keen to have a summit with US President Joe Biden is that he loves the idea of standing on a platform, the same platform as the American leader. He can be seen around the world and to his domestic public as being an international statesman. So if you take that away from him, it undermines one of the main motivations for him going to Geneva, Switzerland in the first place. Nevertheless, Dmitry Peskov, the press attaché, the press secretary for Vladimir Putin, saying that was not a factor at all, and that was not the reason that Vladimir Putin wanted to have this summit. Take a listen.
The main reason for him is a poor state of relationship between our two countries, and a critical level of this relationship that demands a summit between our two countries, because this is the only way to arrange an evaluation of the situation in our relationship, to prevent further degradation.
Well, there you are, Dmitry Peskov saying that basically the relationship is bad and that a summit is the only way really to start the process of addressing that. There is a list as long as your arm when it comes to fraught issues between the United States and Russia, whether it's the military buildup in Ukraine, cyber attacks against the United States, whether it's the crackdown on democracy here and the crackdown on dissidents here. But on none of those issues, the sense I got from Dmitry Peskov there is Vladimir Putin going to this summit prepared to back down. In his words, don't expect any breakthroughs in this summit.
Matthew Chance, thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. Let's bring in David Remnick. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning author and editor of The New Yorker magazine. He's written books and articles about Russia and Putin. He also speaks fluent Russian, just in case you didn't know. So, David, as we know, Putin has been testing the U.S. for quite some time, perhaps even especially in the last few months. What do you think is the best way to get him to stop, let's say, the cyber attacks? Do you think diplomacy is the way to do it?
Diplomacy can't hurt. I think what's foolish is to have illusions about diplomacy, or to have illusions about one meeting can accomplish. Remember Barack Obama's first meeting with Putin in Moscow. Putin opened that meeting with what amounted to a 45-minute long lecture on the great sins of the United States. Obama barely got a word in edgewise for quite a long time. And I expect that Putin will be very eager to go at Joe Biden with the same sense of presenting him with what he sees, and this is an important aspect of Putin's psychology, what he sees as the hypocrisy of the United States, and are daring to, quote unquote, interfere in his affairs. And of course, the irony is that this is a country that has demonstrably interfered in our most sacred thing, a presidential election, to say nothing of cyber crimes and all the rest. So it's going to be a very tense meeting. I think it's better to have it, of course. I think everybody thinks it's better to have it than not to have it. But expectations need to be limited.
There is obviously a range of pressing issues for the two that discuss, not just the cyber attacks by the Russian government and by cyber criminals in Russia, but the imprisonment of Russian dissident Alexei Navalny, interference in the American elections, Russian aggression in Ukraine. How can Biden best be the leader we need him to be, the United States needs him to be? What's the best approach? Do you sit there and listen to the lectures about how hypocritical the United States is? Do you interrupt and lecture him back? What's he to do?
That's what inevitably will happen. There will be lectures back and forth, or eventually there'll be some sort of dialogue. But, you know, we have to remember that this has been a long process for Putin. Putin came into office 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and there were some signs, at least to some people in the United States, that this was somebody that was willing to do business with and have a decent relationship with the United States. Eventually, that went south for all kinds of reasons. What he would say is Iraq and our unreliability and all kinds of things. The United States has its own grievances. It's a very fraught relationship. It can't be overstated. But the first thing that Joe Biden can do, and I think he's accomplished it biologically, is not be Donald Trump.
Right.
Donald Trump was putty in the hands of Vladimir Putin. And I think we all remember that incredible, historic press conference in Finland when Donald Trump basically ceded what was true and what was not true to the leader of Russia, rather than empirical evidence. It was a pathetic display and an embarrassment to the United States and even to some people in the Trump administration itself.
Yeah, it was shocking. You are lowering expectations for the meeting. The White House has also tried to lower expectations for the meeting. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said no one should expect any quote unquote deliverables. That's what happens at these meetings. People like, oh, we have agreed to do X, Y, or Z. Press secretary.
Deliverables is Diplo speak for agreements or exchanges and so on and so forth. The very fact of the meeting is the most important part of the meeting, which is to set the bar pretty low.
Yeah, and usually we should know these deliverables are arranged and negotiated and figured out before the meeting. They know what they're going to come out. It doesn't seem like anything like that is happening here. What does a successful meeting look like to you? We now know what an unsuccessful meeting looks like. We saw it in Finland a few years ago. What is a successful meeting?
That wasn't an unsuccessful meeting. That was a travesty. That was a travesty and a stain on this country and on the history of our leadership. It was a misery, an absolute misery. What the best thing that can be achieved here is an exchange of truths, that Biden can reassert an American sense of what is true and what is not, what we intend and what we do not, and what our feelings are about and our ideas about and intentions are about essential matters like human rights, cyber attacks, and the rest. Russia has gotten worse and worse and worse. Remember, this is, if we go back a long time, when I lived there was a revolution, and there were many people that spoke of democracy as something to be aspired to in Russia. This is spoken of with deep cynicism at the top of the Russian government. I won't even tell you the name of what democracy is twisted into now because it would be censored. It's ugly. And we just witnessed an act by the Russian president essentially getting rid of any real opposition with Alexei Navalny and his movement. And he has his main political opponent in a prison camp after attempting to poison him to death. And he's not the only one who's been poisoned, right?
Right.
Boris Nemtsov, who was a former deputy prime minister, was shot, was murdered, within spitting range of the Kremlin itself not so long ago. This is an ugly situation.
David Remnick, thank you so much. Appreciate your expertise and your time as always.
Always. Take care, Jake.
Terrifying texts sent to public officials, even to one of their wives, forcing one to leave his home for days. That's next. Plus, hunting down the insurrectionists. A close look. In our politics lead, quote, "You and your family will be killed very slowly." Quote, "We plan for the death of you and your family every day." According to a report from Reuters, those are just some of the vile messages that Patricia Raffensperger, the wife of Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, received after the 2020 election because her husband deigned to uphold the law and refused to find votes per Trump's instruction to overturn the democratic election process, as CNN's Amara Walker now reports.
You and your family will be killed very slowly. We plan for the death of you and your family every day. And a warning that a family member was going to have a very unfortunate incident. The death threats came by text to Tricia Raffensperger, wife of Georgia's Secretary of State, detailed in a Reuters interview. The messages coming in April, many months after Donald Trump lost the election. Earlier threats even forcing them into hiding for nearly 1 week. Tricia Raffensperger telling Reuters, "Brad and I didn't feel like we could protect ourselves." She said she canceled weekly visits at her home with 2 grandchildren, 3 and 5 years old. "I couldn't have them come to my house anymore. You don't know if these people are actually going to act on this stuff," she said. She described to Reuters how intruders in late November broke into the home of their widowed daughter-in-law. Secretary Brad Raffensperger spoke about the threats to CNN in December as Trump attacked him incessantly for standing by the election results in Georgia.
He's an enemy of the people.
Where Joe Biden won by a slim margin.
Tricia got the first ones. For some reason, they targeted her. I think, first one was like, tell Brad to step down, and that type of thing. But then they just really, ramped up. And then it went to stage 2. They just got vulgar and rude.
Trump's baseless accusations of voter fraud in Georgia also led to an election worker getting threatened with a noose.
A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason.
These incidents led Gabriel Sterling, a Georgia election official, to angrily call on Trump and Republican leaders to stop the disinformation and condemn the threats.
Someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to get shot, someone's going to get killed. And it's not right.
Still, during a speech before the North Carolina Republican Party last week, former President Trump didn't skip a beat, still promoting false claims of election fraud.
I am not the one trying to undermine American democracy. I'm the one that's trying to save it.
Now, some federal judges overseeing the January 6th insurrection cases have expressed concerns that Trump's rhetoric could inspire more threats of violence. There's also worry about the impact this disinformation could have on election workers and officials during the 2022 midterm elections. In the meantime, Trump is being investigated here in Georgia for election interference, including that phone call he made to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, pressuring him to overturn the election results. Jake?
All right, Amara Walker, thank you so much. In our health lead, the Delta variant, first identified in India, is running rampant around the world, especially in the UK. And the health minister there said that the variant is now responsible for more than 90% of the new cases of COVID in the UK. CNN's Phil Black goes to one northwest town in England where cases have gotten so bad, British Army soldiers have been deployed.
In this corner of northwest England, coronavirus anxiety is peaking again. Here, British Army soldiers walk the streets, handing out information and test kits. Mobile vaccination teams work to get doses to all willing adults. And masks are still everywhere, even outside, a rare sight in the UK.
You worried about what's happening around here?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If you're not, there's something wrong with your head.
The big signs explain why. The town of Bolton is the UK's leading hotspot for a highly contagious coronavirus variant.
I know a lot more people who've had it in the last 3 weeks than I did well, the last 4 weeks compared to the last 12 months, it's a lot of people have caught it.
First discovered during India's recent devastating wave, also known as the Delta variant, it has quickly become the dominant strain in the UK. Analysis conducted by Public Health England has found it's associated with a 64% increased risk of household transmission compared to the UK's previous dominant variant, and it's twice as likely to result in hospitalisation. It's also driven an increase in school outbreaks since children haven't been vaccinated. 8-year-old Mubin Soldier lives in nearby Blackburn, a community where cases of the variant are growing rapidly.
No, I don't know how I've caught it.
Why was he tested?
No temperature, no headache, nothing, alhamdulillah.
It was just a routine test?
Yeah, routine test, just.
The trends suggest that we should be alarmed, but...
Adam Flynn is a professor of paediatrics who advises the British government on vaccine policy.
Because children tend to get this infection less and tend to transmit it less than adults do. So certainly seeing cases amongst children is another canary in the mine, if you like. It's another sign, if it goes on going up, that we're dealing with a highly infectious variant.
The UK's vaccine programme has made huge progress, with more than 50% of all adults now fully vaccinated, and around another quarter of the adult population covered by a first dose. But some scientists fear this new variant could tear through the remaining unprotected population in a wave of cases that would once again place huge pressure on the health system. The government had hoped to lift all remaining social restrictions and reopen society on June 21st. Whether to proceed with that plan is looming as one of the most difficult decisions of Britain's pandemic experience.
Opening up and having a big further wave and having to shut down again would be worse for everyone.
The government is blamed by critics for moving too slowly to stop travel from India, allowing the variant to take hold here. The government says that assessment is unfair, but what it does next will be fiercely scrutinised in a country that has sacrificed much and is desperate to move on.
Our thanks to Phil Black for that report. In our sports lead, with a coronavirus twist, something that has not been seen in Paris throughout the French Open.
Je le rappelle, en accord avec les autorités nationales, le match va pouvoir aller en son terme en votre présence.
Those are fans at the French